Yeah, well, that happens when you take your eye off the focus. You take your eye off the prize, the children.
Mm.
So education is a big money making business, right? There's money in failure. There's a lot of money in failure. And so you have these reading wars, this side against this side. And there's a lot of carnage that happens in war. But there's also people that's making money in war. And so those the whole language side, they made a lot of money. The programs were in almost two-thirds of our districts throughout the United States. A proven system that did not work.
Wow.
Right? There were no stats to say that this worked. There were no statistics to say that this program worked. But what happened? Politics entered education. And when that happens, the we lose the sight of children. They become the back burners, and then the money makers take over. And so you take away the war, you take away profitability of those curriculum developers who are developing the programs and the curriculum that we know that it just doesn't work, right? And so that's what happened over the last 40, 50 years. We were sold a story. And I would recommend, it's a 6-part series. It's actually called Sold a Story. It's really good. We were sold a story. We had a developer come in and say, this is the best thing ever. It had glitter, it had glamour, it dressed nicely, it smelled good, it looked good, and everybody bought into it. It was the state of California that went from the top of the reading ladder to the bottom. And they attributed to only the reading program when they adopted that program. And after a few years, and this was in the 90s, they flipped back. New York, Klein, knew that it didn't work. Knew that it didn't work. They still had some of the schools participating in it. The next mayor that came in, we knew it didn't work. The mayor continued using the same program.
Wow.
Sense of insanity, right?
Wow.
I'll let you take your question, Autumn.
It's crazy. I think from my experience as like from being a student, I suffered a lot from test anxiety because I think like that's all that was really promoted after a while. Like learning kind of dropped and it just mattered if you passed the test. And recently I just watched a movie called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Amazing, amazing story. Um, and like his parents taught him how to read. Long story short, because he was able to read a science book, he was able to build a windmill that greatly helped his village, and they were able to keep the harvest all year long. And it just made me think like learning and being able to read, it unlocks knowledge, and knowledge is gold because you never know like when you're going to need to call on that bit of knowledge in your life. So how do we kind of reinstill in our children like the thirst for knowledge and for learning versus just passing a statewide exam or getting a good grade on a test, because it's easy to retain and memorize stuff for a test but then lose it all, you know.
That's a good question because that's what's happening in our schools. We're preparing for a test. We're not preparing them for the real world.
Right.
Just take that the child's interest and and putting them in a situation where they will be able to research and get more interested in the topic and gain more information. And now you have this structure. Who wouldn't want that for a child? Who wouldn't want that type of experience for their students? The problem is a lot of times school districts, our hands are tied. So we only have 6 hours in a school day, right? 6 hours. And that 6 hours is divided with math and science and social studies and PE. It's not, it's you, we're trying to do so much with so little, which is why the title of my book, it takes a village to educate a child. And so we've got to use outside things that's happening outside, those experiences and opportunities that's outside of the school to build those types of interests so that they understand the power that reading has. And we've got to put the phones down and we've got to put the iPads down and they've got to see us read. They've got to see us inquire. I don't know about something. Let me research it.
Yeah.
Right? Let me figure this out. And then we have to celebrate learning. We have to celebrate learning. When you've learned something and you've been trying, you persevere. That's a high five. That's a knuckle bump. That's you gotta celebrate that. And we have to do the same thing that we do in sports. How many Knicks fans? They were celebrating. They were on top. They were celebrating. They were having a good time. But we don't do that as far as academics is concerned.
Mm.
So why would I want to learn something and I'm not going to get that reward, that feeling that athletes get? So I want to be an athlete. Not to say that athletes don't have the academic part, but the way we celebrate the the status and the of the athletes, we don't do that for those that are in academia. So we've got to change our mindset. We've got to change how we interact with our students, whether our athletes or whether those that excel academically. We have to celebrate them the same way. Um, I don't think that it was so much of a change. We've always had a reading problem. There's always been a reading problem, right? COVID did not unveil this great big reading problem. COVID unveiled the access and accessibility, right? That woke us up. But we've always had a problem in this country with reading, going back to anti-literacy laws. So I just want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that our brains were not wired to read. We have to teach it, right? It does this great thing. It rewires itself, right, to form pathways for reading to develop. A lot of people don't understand that. It's very different than language. Language, you can put a child in a room full of people who are speaking and they will speak. You don't have to teach them how to talk, right? That is not going to happen for reading. You cannot sit someone in a room full of people who are reading, whether they're reading out loud or silently. It's not going to happen. You have to teach it to read, right? That starts very early. What we think is reading starts in kindergarten, and then we build these habits in kindergarten. And if we think that, we're 5 years already behind, right? Reading starts really at the moment of conception. How? Well, all of the stuff that mom eats, all of the environmental pressures and stress impacts the developing brain. Reading is all about the brain. The brain is the main character, right? And so if we understand that, then we have a point of reference. And so how do we build stamina, right? Because in order to learn to read and read well, you have to build stamina. I'm like, this is a race, right? Not for the quick athlete, but it's endurance. And it took us years, decades to get here. My book has only been out since August. It's not going to take months for us to get out. And so people have to come to the point where I came to and say, okay, I reflected, now I see, and now I'm going to do better. When you know better, you do better.